Victor Castellano ruled Chicago's underworld with an iron fist and a cold heart, until a blind date arranged by his meddling sister brought him face to face with Emma Hayes, a single mother whose quiet strength and fierce love for her daughter shattered every wall he'd built. What began as an obligation became an obsession, and what he thought was control turned into surrender. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. Victor Castellano sat in the back corner booth of Rossi's, a steakhouse on West Taylor Street that had been laundering money for 3 generations. The leather beneath him was worn smooth by decades of deals made in whispers, and the scent of garlic and charred meat hung thick in the air. Outside, November rain hammered the windows, streaking the neon signs of Little Italy into blurred ribbons of red and gold. He was 42 years old, and he had never once sat at this table without knowing exactly what would happen next. Tonight was different. "You're really going through with this?" Marco, his second in command, leaned against the bar, arms crossed. He was a bull of a man, loyal as a dog, and just as subtle. His knuckles were scarred from years of enforcing Victor's will, and his eyes carried the same hardness that came from seeing too much, too young. "My sister won't stop calling," Victor said, his voice low and even. He didn't look up from his phone, where Angela's last 17 messages sat unread. Each one was a variation of the same theme. "You need to meet someone. You can't live like this forever. Just one dinner, Vic, please." "Normal," Marco snorted, reaching for his beer. "Boss, you run half this city. Normal doesn't exist for you." Victor finally glanced up. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they carried the weight of too many decisions made in rooms where mercy was a luxury. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. His hair was salt and pepper, combed back with precision, and a thin scar traced his jawline, a reminder from his 20s, when he'd been hungrier and less careful. Back then, a rival family had tried to take him out in an alley behind a bar on Halsted. He'd walked away. They hadn't. "She set it up," he said, setting his phone face down on the table. "Some woman she met at a charity thing. I show up, I'm polite, I leave. Angela stops calling." Marco shook his head, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're a good brother. A crazy one, but good." The rain picked up, drumming harder against the glass. Victor checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people made in a year. 7:58. The woman, Emma, Angela had said, was supposed to arrive at 8. He didn't expect much. He'd been on dates before years ago, back when he thought he might build something outside the life. There had been Sophia, a lawyer who'd asked too many questions. Then Gabriella, a banker's daughter who'd wanted the thrill of danger until she'd actually seen what that meant. And Maria, who'd loved him until she'd realized he could never love her, back the way she needed. Every woman who got close either wanted the power or feared the truth, and Victor had learned that loneliness was safer than betrayal. At 8:03, the door opened. She stepped inside, shaking rain from a navy blue coat. She was younger than he expected, mid-30s maybe, with auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail and freckles scattered across her cheeks like constellations. She wore jeans and a cream-colored sweater, nothing flashy, and she carried herself with the kind of tired grace that came from years of holding things together alone. She scanned the room, her eyes moving past the couples at the front tables, the old men nursing wine at the bar, until they landed on him. She hesitated, just for a moment, and Victor saw the flicker of uncertainty cross her face. Then she straightened her shoulders and walked over. Victor stood, buttoning his jacket out of habit. "Emma?" he asked. She nodded, extending her hand. "Victor, Angela's told me a lot about you." Her handshake was firm, her palm cold from the rain. Victor noted the calluses on her fingers, nurse's hands, hands that worked. "All lies," he said, pulling out her chair. She smiled, just a little, and the expression transformed her face. "She said you'd say that." They sat. A waiter appeared, Sal's nephew, a kid named Tony who knew better than to linger, poured water, and vanished. The restaurant hummed with low conversation and the clink of silverware. Victor studied her, not the way he studied rivals, looking for weakness, but the way a man studies something unfamiliar and unexpectedly compelling. She had green eyes, he noticed, not the pale green of sea glass, but deep, like forest shade, and when she looked at him, She didn't look away. "So," Emma said, holding her hands on the table, "Angela says you're in import-export. Something like that. That's vague." "It's accurate." She laughed, a soft sound that caught him off guard. It wasn't practiced or polite. It was genuine, the kind of laugh that came from someone who found real humor in the absurdity of life. "Okay, I'll bite. What do you import?" "Opportunity," Victor said, his tone dry. "And I export problems." Her smile faded, just a fraction. She wasn't stupid. She'd heard the rumors, maybe, or she'd simply learned to recognize danger when it sat across from her. But she didn't get up. She didn't make an excuse. She just took a sip of water and held his gaze. "And you?" he asked, steering the conversation. "Angela said you work at a hospital." "I'm a nurse. Pediatrics. At Northwestern Memorial." She set her glass down carefully. "I work nights, mostly. My daughter's in school during the day, so it's easier." "Your daughter?" "Lily. She's 7. Emma's face softened when she said the name, and Victor saw something in her expression that he hadn't seen in years. Unguarded love, fierce and absolute. The kind of love that would burn down the world if it meant keeping someone safe. "She's the reason I do everything." Victor nodded slowly. He understood that kind of devotion, though his own was bound to a different code. "It's just the two of you. Her father's not in the picture," Emma said, her tone flat, matter of fact. "Hasn't been since she was 2. He decided being a dad was too much responsibility. It's better that way." There was no bitterness in her voice, only fact. Victor respected that. He'd spent his life around people who made excuses, who blamed the world for their choices, who played victim when they were really just weak. Emma didn't seem like the type. "That must be hard," he said, "doing it alone." "It is, but I wouldn't trade it." She met his eyes. "You learn what matters when you don't have a choice." The waiter returned, setting down menus. They ordered. Victor, a ribeye, rare. Emma, the salmon with roasted vegetables. The rain outside turned into a steady pour, and the restaurant lights dimmed slightly, casting everything in amber. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said after a moment. "Go ahead. Why did you agree to this?" "Angela said you don't date. She said you haven't been on a date in years." Victor considered the question. He could lie, tell her something smooth and practiced, something that would make him seem less pathetic, but there was something about her, maybe the way she looked at him, direct and unafraid, that made him want to be honest. "I don't," he admitted, "but my sister's persistent, and I figured one night wouldn't kill me." "Wow." Emma raised an eyebrow, but there was amusement in her eyes. "You really know how to make a girl feel special." He almost smiled. "I didn't mean it like that." "I know." She leaned back in her chair, studying him the way he'd studied her. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone colder, maybe. Angela said you were intense. She said you were brilliant and terrifying in equal measure." "I am." "Yeah," Emma said quietly, her eyes never leaving his. "I can see that." Their food arrived, steam rising from the plates. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Victor found himself watching her, the way she cut her salmon into precise, even pieces, the way she glanced toward the window every so often, as if checking the weather, checking for threats. She was careful, deliberate, and he recognized the habit. It was the behavior of someone who'd learned to anticipate trouble, someone who'd been hurt and had taught herself to be ready. "Do you like Chicago?" he asked. "I grew up here. North Side, near Wrigley Field. My mom still lives there, in the same apartment I grew up in." She paused, spearing a piece of asparagus. "Lily and I are in Logan Square now. It's quieter. Better schools. Good neighborhood. It's coming up. It's getting better," she agreed. "Still rough around the edges, but that's Chicago." She met his eyes. "What about you? Where do you live?" "Gold Coast." She didn't react outwardly, but he saw the flicker of understanding in her eyes. Gold Coast meant money, power, penthouses with views of the lake, the kind of life most people only saw in magazines or movies. "Must be nice," she said, and there was no judgment in her voice, just observation. "It's convenient." "Convenient," she repeated, a small smile playing at her lips. "That's one way to put it." They finished their meal. The waiter cleared the plates, offered dessert. Emma declined. Victor ordered coffee, black, and a tiramisu. He had no intention of eating but ordered because Sal would be offended if he didn't. The restaurant was beginning to empty now, couples paying their bills, pulling on coats, stepping out into the rain. The candle on their table had burned down to a stub, wax pooling at the base. "I should go," Emma said, glancing at her phone. "My mom's watching Lily, and I don't like to keep her up too late. She's got school tomorrow." Victor stood when she did, a reflex drilled into him by his mother before she died. "I'll walk you out." They moved toward the door, and Marco, still at the bar nursing his third beer, caught Victor's eye. He gave a small nod. "Everything's clear," and Victor returned it. Outside, the air was cold and damp, the kind of November cold that sank into your bones. Emma pulled her coat tighter, and Victor noticed the way her breath fogged in the streetlight, the way raindrops clung to her hair like tiny diamonds. "Thank you for dinner," she said, turning to face him. "Thank you for coming." She hesitated, then smiled. "You know, you're not as scary as Angela made you sound. Give it time." She laughed, and the sound cut through the rain like light, like something pure in a world that had forgotten what pure meant. "Good night, Victor." "Good night, Emma." She walked toward her car, a beat-up Honda Civic parked half a block down, its paint faded and one taillight held on with duct tape. Victor watched until she drove away, her taillights disappearing into the wet Chicago night, swallowed by the city. Marco appeared beside him, lighting a cigarette. "So, how'd it go?" Victor didn't answer right away. He stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the empty street where her car had been. Something had shifted tonight, something small, but undeniable. He'd expected obligation, politeness, the kind of evening you endured and then forgot. He'd found something else. "Call Angela," he said finally. "Tell her I want Emma's number." Marco blinked, cigarette halfway to his lips. "Boss, just do it." Victor turned and walked back inside, past the bar, past Sal who was counting receipts, into the back office where he kept a bottle of scotch older than Marco. He poured himself 2 fingers and sat in the leather chair that had belonged to Sal's father and his father before him. The rain began to fall harder, drumming against the roof like 1,000 tiny fists, and Victor sat there in the dark, thinking about green eyes and tired grace and the way Emma had looked at him, not with fear, not with calculation, but with something he couldn't quite name. Outside, the city hummed and breathed and carried on, unaware that something in Victor Castellanos' carefully constructed world had just started to crack. Victor called her 3 days later. He sat in his office on the 40th floor of a building he owned in the Loop, staring at her number on his phone. Outside, the city stretched gray and endless beneath a low December sky, Lake Michigan churning dark and restless in the distance. He'd closed a deal that morning, a shipping contract with a logistics company out of Gary, Indiana, that would net him $2 million in clean money over the next year, and he'd done it without blinking, without hesitation. But calling a woman he'd met once, a woman who had no place in his world, felt like stepping off a ledge into nothing. He pressed dial. She answered on the 4th ring. "Hello? Emma, it's Victor." A pause. He heard voices in the background, the beep of machines, the distant sound of a child crying. She was at work. "Victor," she said, and he couldn't tell if she was surprised or annoyed. "Hi, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I wanted to see if you'd like to have dinner again." Another pause, longer this time. "Are you serious?" "I don't joke about dinner." She laughed, soft and tired. "I'm at the hospital right now. We just had a kid come in with a fever of 104. Can I call you back?" "Of course." "Okay, give me an hour." She hung up. Victor set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath him. Across the room, Marco stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the city below. "You're really doing this," Marco said. It wasn't a question. Apparently. "Boss, she's not—" Marco stopped, choosing his words carefully. "She's not one of us." "I know. So what's the play? You dating her to get something? Information? Leverage?" Victor turned to look at him, and Marco actually took a step back. Victor's expression hadn't changed, but there was something in his eyes, something cold and final. "There's no play," Victor said quietly. "I like her. That's it." Marco nodded slowly, understanding the message. "Don't push." "All right, boss. Just be careful." "I'm always careful." An hour later, his phone buzzed. "Emma." "Hey," she said, and he could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "Sorry about that. The kid's stable now. Parents were freaking out, but she's going to be fine." "Is she okay?" "She will be, just a bad flu. Scary for a 7-year-old, though." Emma's voice softened. "So, dinner, if you're free." "I'm free Friday, but I have to be home by 10. Lily has a soccer game Saturday morning and she needs her sleep. Friday works. I'll pick you up at 7. You don't have to pick me up. I can meet you. I want to. She was quiet for a moment, and Victor could almost see her, standing in some hospital corridor, phone pressed to her ear, trying to decide if this was a good idea. Okay, she said finally. 7. They made plans. He'd pick her up at her apartment. They'd go somewhere quieter than Rossi's. Victor hung up and stared at the phone, a strange warmth settling in his chest, unfamiliar and unsettling. Marco was still watching him. What? Victor asked. Nothing, boss. Just never seen you like this. Like what? Human. Victor didn't respond. He turned back to his desk, to the contracts and ledgers and the machinery of his empire. But the work felt distant now, unimportant. The rain outside had started again, tapping against the glass like a question he couldn't answer. Friday came fast. Victor spent the day handling business, a meeting with his accountant, a call with a judge he had on payroll, a brief but tense conversation with a union boss who was getting too greedy. By 6:30, he was showered, dressed in a navy suit with no tie, and driving toward Logan Square in his black Audi. Emma's building was a 3-story walk-up on a quiet block, lined with bare trees and parked cars. The neighborhood had that in-between quality, not quite gentrified, not quite rough, just working-class people trying to get by. Victor parked and texted her. She came down a minute later, and Victor's breath caught. She wore a dark green dress that hit just below her knees, simple but elegant, and a wool coat over it. Her hair was down, curling slightly at the ends, and she'd put on lipstick, subtle, but enough to make him notice. She looked beautiful, and more than that, she looked happy. Hi, she said, sliding into the passenger seat. The scent of her perfume, something light, floral, filled the car. Hi, Victor said, and for a moment he just looked at her. What? Emma asked, a smile tugging at her lips. Nothing. You look nice. Thanks. You clean up pretty well yourself. He pulled away from the curb, and they drove in comfortable silence for a few blocks. The city lights blurred past, and the heater hummed softly. Victor found himself hyper-aware of her presence, the way she sat, the way she glanced out the window, the way her fingers drummed lightly against her knee. Where are we going? Emma asked. Somewhere quiet. I thought you might like a break from the noise. He took her to a small Italian place in Bucktown, a spot called Piccolo Sogno that he owned through a shell company. The owner, an old man named Sal, no relation to the other Sal, greeted him with a nod and a knowing smile, then led them to a private table in the back, away from the other diners. The restaurant was warm, dimly lit by candles and soft overhead lights. The walls were exposed brick, and the air smelled like fresh bread, garlic, and red wine. A jazz trio played quietly in the corner, piano, bass, and a woman singing in Italian. This place is beautiful, Emma said, looking around. How did you find it? I've known Sal a long time. He opened this place 20 years ago. I helped him get started. He seems to like you. He owes me. Emma tilted her head, studying him. Should I ask? Probably not. She smiled, but there was something in her eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or concern. You're a mystery, Victor Castellano. Is that a bad thing? I don't know yet. Sal brought them wine without asking, a bottle of Barolo that cost more than most people made in a week, and poured 2 glasses. Emma took a sip, her eyes widening slightly. This is incredible, she said. Sal knows his wine. They ordered. Emma, the pappardelle with wild boar ragu. Victor, the osso buco. The food came quickly, perfectly prepared, and they ate in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Tell me about Lily, Victor said after a while. Emma's face lit up, the way it had at Rossi's, and Victor realized he'd asked the question just to see that expression again. She's amazing, Emma said, setting down her fork. Smart, funny, stubborn as hell. She wants to be a veterinarian or an astronaut, or maybe both. She changes her mind every week, but she's passionate about everything. Last month she decided she was going to save all the stray cats in Chicago. We now have 3. Victor smiled. 3 cats. 3. Mr. Whiskers, Princess Fluffington, and Steve. Steve? She named him. I have no idea why. Emma laughed, and the sound was light, genuine. She keeps me busy, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. She's the best thing I've ever done. Sounds like she's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. Emma took another sip of wine. What about you? Do you have kids? No. Ever want them? Victor hesitated. It was a question he'd never let himself answer. Not really. Children meant vulnerability, meant caring about something more than survival. In his world, that was a liability. I don't know if I'd be good at it, he said finally. Why not? My life isn't exactly stable. Whose is? Emma leaned forward slightly. I'm a single mom working night shifts at a hospital. I live paycheck to paycheck, and half the time I'm running on 3 hours of sleep and coffee. Stability is a myth, Victor. You just do the best you can. He looked at her, and for a moment, he saw something in her eyes. Understanding, maybe, or acceptance. She wasn't naive. She knew he was dangerous, knew there were parts of his life he wasn't telling her, but she was here anyway. You're right, he said quietly. I usually am. They finished their meal, talking about everything and nothing. Her childhood on the north side, his memories of growing up in Bridgeport, the way the city had changed over the years. Emma told him about her shifts at the hospital, the kids she treated, the parents who broke her heart. Victor told her about his father, who'd run numbers for the outfit, and his mother, who died of cancer when he was 12. I'm sorry, Emma said softly, her hand reaching across the table to touch his. It was a long time ago. Doesn't make it easier. He didn't argue. She was right. The pain had dulled over the years, but it never really went away. You just learned to carry it. The evening stretched on, and Victor found himself forgetting the weight he carried. With Emma, he wasn't the boss, the fixer, the man who made problems disappear. He was just Victor, and it felt like breathing after years underwater. When they finished, Sal brought them espresso and biscotti, refusing to bring a check. Victor left $500 on the table anyway. He drove Emma home, the streets quiet now, the city settling into its late-night rhythm. He parked outside her building, and Emma turned to him, her expression soft in the dim light. Thank you, she said. I had a really good time. So did I. She hesitated, then leaned over and kissed his cheek. It was brief, barely a touch, but it burned. Good night, Victor. Good night, Emma. She got out, and he watched her disappear inside, her figure silhouetted in the doorway before the door closed. Then he sat there, alone in the dark, the rain starting up again, light and steady. Marco's words echoed in his head. She's not one of us. But maybe that was the point. Maybe that was exactly why he couldn't stop thinking about her. Over the next month, Victor saw Emma whenever he could. Dinners at quiet restaurants, coffee at a place near the hospital where she'd meet him during her breaks, a walk along the lakefront when the weather cleared and the December sun broke through the clouds. They talked about everything, her dreams for Lily, his complicated relationship with his sister, the books they'd read, the movies they'd loved as kids. Emma made him laugh, something he hadn't done in years. She challenged him, called him out when he was being evasive, and didn't let him hide behind the walls he'd built. And slowly, carefully, Victor let her in. One Saturday afternoon, Emma invited him to meet Lily. Victor arrived at her apartment at noon, carrying a bag from a toy store on Michigan Avenue. He'd spent an hour wandering the aisles, feeling ridiculous, before finally asking a saleswoman for help. She'd recommended a science kit, something about growing crystals, and Victor had bought it along with a stuffed cat that reminded him of the story about Steve. Emma opened the door, and behind her stood a little girl with auburn hair and pigtails and her mother's green eyes. She wore jeans and a purple sweater with a unicorn on it, and she looked at Victor with wide, curious eyes. Lily, this is Victor, Emma said. He's my friend. Are you my mom's boyfriend? Lily asked, direct and unfiltered in the way only children could be. Emma blushed. Lily, it's okay, Victor said. He crouched down to Lily's level, meeting her eyes. I'm her friend. Is that okay with you? Lily considered this, her head tilting to one side. Do you like pizza? I do. Do you like cats? I do. Do you like my mom? Victor glanced up at Emma, who was covering her face with her hand, mortified. Then he looked back at Lily and said, I do. Very much. Lily nodded, satisfied. Then it's okay. Victor handed her the bag. I brought you something. Lily's eyes went wide. She pulled out the science kit, then the stuffed cat, and she squealed with delight. Mom, look. It's like Steve. I see that, baby. Lily threw her arms around Victor's neck, hugging him tight, and Victor froze, unsure what to do. Then, slowly, he hugged her back, and he felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of it. They ordered pizza and spent the afternoon at Emma's apartment. Lily showed Victor her drawings, her collection of rocks, for 3 cats who eyed him suspiciously from various perches. Emma made coffee, and they sat on the couch while Lily worked on her crystal kit at the kitchen table, narrating every step. "She likes you," Emma said quietly. "I like her. She doesn't warm up to people easily. Her dad," Emma trailed off, her expression darkening. "He left, and it hurt her. She's careful now." "I understand." Emma looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you? Because if you're going to be in our lives, Victor, I need to know you're serious. I can't have her get attached to someone who's going to disappear." Victor met her gaze, and he saw the fear there, the protectiveness. She was a mother first, and she would do anything to keep her daughter safe. "I'm serious," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Emma studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat there, watching Lily work, the afternoon light streaming through the window. Outside, the city hummed, and for the first time in years, Victor felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, but the life he'd built didn't allow for peace. One night, as he left Emma's apartment, his phone buzzed. "Marco, we have a problem." Victor's jaw tightened. He was standing on the sidewalk outside Emma's building, the December cold biting through his coat. "What kind?" "The Rossi family. Tony's pushing back on the docks. He wants a bigger cut, and he's threatening to go to the feds if we don't play ball." Victor closed his eyes, exhaustion washing over him. Tony Rossi was the son of an old ally, a kid who'd inherited his father's territory but none of his sense. He was ambitious, reckless, and stupid, a dangerous combination. "Set up a meeting," Victor said. "When?" "Tonight. Boss, it's almost midnight." "I don't care. Set it up." He hung up and looked back at Emma's building, the lights in her window glowing warm against the cold. The rain was starting again, light and steady, and Victor stood there, caught between 2 worlds. He didn't know it yet, but the choice was already being made for him. The meeting with Tony Rossi took place in a warehouse on the south side, the kind of place where concrete floors swallowed sound, and rust climbed the walls like ivy. Victor arrived at midnight, Marco at his side, and 2 of his men, Danny and Luca, flanking the door. The air smelled like oil and old metal, and the overhead lights buzzed like dying insects, casting everything in sickly yellow. Tony was already there, leaning against a stack of pallets, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He was younger than Victor, maybe 35, with slicked back hair and a suit that cost too much for a man who'd inherited his power, instead of earning it. Behind him stood 4 of his crew, all watching Victor with the kind of dumb loyalty that came from fear, not respect. "Castellano," Tony said, licking ash onto the floor. "Thanks for coming." Victor didn't smile. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the empty space, and stopped 10 feet away. "You wanted to talk." "Talk." Tony pushed off the pallets and walked closer, his footsteps echoing. "The docks. You've been moving product through my territory without cutting me improperly." "That's disrespectful." "Your territory?" Victor's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Your father and I had an agreement. I use the docks. You get 15% of the clean money. Nothing's changed." "My father's dead," Tony said flatly. "And I'm renegotiating." Victor studied him. Tony was ambitious, hungry, and stupid. A dangerous combination. He wanted to prove himself, to step out of his father's shadow, and he thought pushing Victor was the way to do it. He was wrong. "What do you want?" Victor asked. 50%. Marco stiffened beside him, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun under his jacket. But Victor didn't react. He just stared at Tony, his expression unreadable. "You're joking," Victor said. "Do I look like I'm joking? You look like a kid playing dress-up in his father's clothes." Tony's face darkened, his jaw clenching. "Watch your mouth, old man." Victor took a step forward, and the temperature in the room dropped. His men shifted, hands moving toward concealed weapons. Tony's crew did the same, and for a moment, the warehouse was balanced on the edge of violence. "Let me explain something to you," Victor said, his voice low and even. "Your father understood how this works. You take what you're given, you stay in your lane, and you don't get greedy. You want to renegotiate? Fine. But you come at me with respect, not demands. And you sure as hell don't threaten me." Tony's jaw clenched. "I'm not my father." "No," Victor said. "You're not. Your father was smart. He knew when to push and when to back off. You're just reckless. We'll see how long you last, Castellano. Things are changing. The old ways are dying, and you're dying with them." Victor turned and walked toward the door, Marco and his men following. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Tony Rossi was a problem, but not an urgent one. Not yet. Outside, the December wind cut through his coat, and the city stretched dark and restless around them. Marco lit a cigarette, his breath fogging in the cold. "He's going to be trouble," Marco said. "I know. You want me to handle it?" Victor shook his head. "Not yet. Let him think he's won something. We'll deal with him when the time's right." They drove back to the Gold Coast in silence, the streets empty and slick with ice. Victor's mind was already moving, calculating angles, weighing risks, but underneath it all, there was something else, a distraction he couldn't shake. Emma. He'd been seeing her for 6 weeks now, and she'd become a constant in his life, a rhythm he hadn't known he needed. She texted him in the mornings, sent him pictures of Lily's drawings, called him after her shifts just to talk, and every time his phone buzzed with her name, he felt the weight of his world lift, just a little. But tonight, driving through the cold Chicago streets, he felt that weight return. Because Tony Rossi wasn't the only problem. The problem was that Victor Castellano, a man who'd spent his life building walls, had let someone in, and in his world, that was the most dangerous thing he could do. 2 days later, Emma invited him to Lily's school Christmas concert. Victor almost said no. He had a shipment coming in from Gary, a meeting with his accountant about the quarterly taxes, a dozen other things that mattered more than a children's choir singing off-key carols. But then Emma sent him a photo. Lily in a red velvet dress, holding a tambourine, grinning like she'd won the lottery. And he found himself saying yes. The concert was held in the school gymnasium, a cramped space filled with folding chairs, and the smell of floor wax and construction paper. Parents crowded in, holding phones and cameras, and the stage was decorated with construction paper snowflakes and a lopsided cardboard Christmas tree that leaned precariously to one side. Victor sat in the back row, feeling out of place in his tailored coat and Italian shoes. Around him, parents chatted and laughed, and he felt like an intruder in a world he didn't understand. Emma found him before the concert started, Lily bouncing at her side. "You came," Lily said, her eyes wide with delight. "I did. Are you going to watch me play the tambourine?" "I wouldn't miss it." Lily beamed and ran off to join the other kids backstage. Emma sat down beside Victor, her shoulder brushing his, and he caught the scent of her perfume, something light and floral that made him think of spring. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "This means a lot to her. To me. I'm glad I'm here." The lights dimmed, and the concert began. The kids filed onto the stage, a chaotic mass of red and green and white, and they launched into Jingle Bells, with enthusiasm that far exceeded their musical ability. Lily stood in the front row, shaking her tambourine with fierce concentration, her tongue poking out slightly in focus. Victor found himself smiling, a real smile, not the cold, calculated one he used in meetings. He watched Lily, watched the other kids, watched the parents around him recording every moment, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Halfway through, Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, Emma reached over and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, and she didn't let go. Victor looked at her, and she looked back, and in that moment, surrounded by the chaos of children and Christmas carols, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. After the concert, they went out for hot chocolate at a diner near the school. Lily talked non-stop about the performance, about how she hadn't missed a single beat, about how her friend Sophie had forgotten the words to Frosty the Snowman and had just hummed instead. Victor listened, asking questions, and Lily answered with the kind of earnest enthusiasm that only children possessed. Emma watched them, a soft smile on her face, and Victor realized that this simple, ordinary moment was more valuable than anything he'd ever built. When they got back to Emma's apartment, Lily was asleep in the back seat. Victor carried her upstairs, her head resting on his shoulder, and Emma unlocked the door. He laid Lily on her bed, and Emma pulled off her shoes and tucked her in, kissing her forehead. They stepped out into the hallway, and Emma closed the door softly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For being here. For caring." Victor pulled her close, and she wrapped her arms around him, and they stood there in the dim hallway, holding each other. Outside, the city hummed, and the rain started up again, tapping against the window. "I care about you," Victor said quietly. "Both of you." Emma pulled back, looking up at him. "I care about you too. But Victor," she hesitated, "I need to know what I'm getting into. You're not just an import-export, are you?" Victor's chest tightened. He'd known this moment would come, but he'd hoped it would be later, when he'd figured out how to explain the unexplainable. "No," he said. "I'm not. What do you do?" "I run things. Businesses mostly. Some legal, some not." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Are you dangerous?" "Yes." Are you going to hurt me? Or Lily?" "Never." She studied his face, searching for the truth. Then she nodded. "Okay. Okay? I'm not naive, Victor. I grew up in this city. I know how things work, and I know you're not telling me everything. But I also know that you're good to me, and you're good to Lily. So for now, that's enough." Victor felt something loosen in his chest. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. "Thank you." Emma kissed him, soft and brief, then stepped back. "Good night, Victor." "Good night, Emma." He left, walking down the stairs and out into the cold December night. The rain was falling harder now, and he stood on the sidewalk, looking up at her window, and he made a decision. He would protect them, no matter what it cost. But peace didn't last. The next morning, Victor's phone rang at 6 a.m. It was Marco, and his voice was tight with urgency. "Boss, we've got a problem." Victor sat up, already awake. "What happened?" "The shipment from Gary. It's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "Someone hit the warehouse. Took everything. 2 of our guys are dead. Polly and Frankie." Victor's blood went cold. Polly had worked for him for 15 years. Frankie had a wife and 2 kids. Who? Don't know yet. But it's professional. Clean. They knew exactly when the shipment was coming in. Exactly where it was stored. "Someone talked, boss. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and dressed quickly, his mind racing. A hit like that took planning, resources, and inside information. Someone had betrayed him, and someone else had made a move. He thought of Tony Rossi, of the smug smile in the warehouse. This had his fingerprints all over it. Victor grabbed his coat and headed for the door, but as he reached for the handle, his phone buzzed again. A text from Emma. "Good morning. Coffee later." He stared at the message, and for the first time in his life, Victor Castellano didn't know what to do. Because the world he'd built, the one of violence and control, was colliding with the world he wanted, and he couldn't have both. He texted back, "I'll call you later." Then he walked out into the cold Chicago morning, the rain starting up again, and he knew that everything was about to change. The warehouse smelled like blood and gasoline. Victor stood in the center of the carnage, his hands in his pockets, his face a mask of cold fury. 2 of his men lay dead near the loading dock, their bodies covered with tarps, stained dark red. The shipment, 50 kilos of product, worth $3 million on the street, was gone. The locks had been cut with precision, the security cameras disabled with professional efficiency, and the whole operation had taken less than 10 minutes. Marco stood beside him, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. It was Rossi. Had to be. Victor didn't answer. He walked to the far wall, where someone had spray-painted a message in red. "Your time's up, old man." He stared at the words, his mind calculating. Tony Rossi was bold, but he wasn't this bold. This wasn't just a robbery. This was a declaration of war. And the precision, the professionalism, that wasn't Tony's style. He had help. "Get everyone together," Victor said quietly. "I want eyes on every corner of this city. I want to know where Tony is, who he's talking to, and who helped him. And I want it by tonight." "Boss." "Tonight, Marco." Marco nodded and pulled out his phone, barking orders to the crew. Victor turned and walked out of the warehouse, the cold air hitting him like a slap. The rain had stopped, but the sky was low and gray, pressing down on the city like a weight. He got into his car and sat there, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He'd been in this business for 20 years, and he'd survived because he was smarter, colder, and more ruthless than everyone else. But now, for the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt since he was a kid on the South Side, watching his father get beaten by loan sharks. Fear. Not fear of Tony Rossi, not fear of losing money or territory, fear of what this would cost him. Because the deeper he went into this war, the further he moved from Emma, from Lily, from the life he'd started to imagine. His phone buzzed. "Emma. Hey, you okay? You sounded off this morning." He stared at the message, his chest tightening. He wanted to call her, to hear her voice, to pretend for just a moment that he was someone else, someone normal, someone who didn't have blood on his hands. But he couldn't. Not now. He typed back, "I'm fine. Just busy. I'll call you soon." He hit send and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. Then he started the car and drove toward the loop, toward his office, toward the only world he'd ever really known. By nightfall, Marco had answers. They met in Victor's office, the city lights glittering 40 floors below, like a constellation of broken promises. Marco spread a series of photos across the desk, surveillance shots of Tony Rossi meeting with a man Victor didn't recognize. "Who is he?" Victor asked, leaning forward. "Name's Dmitry Volkov, Russian. He's been moving into the city over the past 6 months, buying up territory on the west side, pushing out the old crews. Word is he's looking to expand east." Victor studied the photos. Volkov was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down the side of his face like a lightning bolt. He looked like a man who'd seen violence and enjoyed it, who'd survived wars and come out harder. "So Tony's working with the Russians," Victor said. "Looks like it. Volkov's got the muscle, Tony's got the local connections and the knowledge of your operations. They hit us together, split the product, and use the money to push us out. Classic pincer move." Victor leaned back in his chair, his mind working through scenarios, outcomes, risks. This was bigger than he'd thought. Tony wasn't just ambitious. He was desperate. And he'd made a deal with someone who didn't play by the old rules. Someone who saw Chicago as just another city to conquer. "What do you want to do?" Marco asked. Victor was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city. Then he said, "Set up a meeting with Volkov." Marco blinked. "Boss, you sure that's smart? I want to know what I'm dealing with. If Volkov's making a move, I need to understand why. I need to know his endgame. And I need to know if Tony's the only one he's working with, or if there are others. And if he won't meet, then we go to war." Marco nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what Victor was saying. "I'll make the call." He left, and Victor sat alone in his office, staring out at the city. Somewhere out there, Emma was finishing her shift at the hospital, checking on sick kids, comforting worried parents. Lily was probably asleep, curled up with her stuffed animals and her 3 cats. They were living their lives, unaware of the storm building around them. Victor pulled out his phone and opened Emma's last message. "You okay?" He wanted to tell her the truth. He wanted to say that he was drowning, that the life he'd built was collapsing, and that the only thing keeping him sane was the thought of her. But he couldn't, because the moment he let her in completely, the moment he made her part of his world, she became a target, and he couldn't live with that. He set the phone down and poured himself a drink. Scotch, 25 years old, smooth and burning. Outside, the rain started up again, tapping against the glass like a warning he couldn't ignore. The meeting with Volkov was set for 2 days later, in a neutral location, a closed restaurant in Greektown, a place that had been shuttered for months after a health code violation. Victor arrived with Marco and 2 of his best men, Luca and Tommy, all of them armed. Volkov was already there, sitting at a table in the back, flanked by 4 Russians who looked like they could break a man in half without breaking a sweat. They wore dark suits and dead eyes, and they watched Victor with the kind of cold assessment that came from years of violence. Victor sat down across from Volkov. "Volkov. Castellano." Volkov's accent was thick. His voice like gravel scraped across concrete. "I've heard much about you. The great Victor Castellano, the man who runs Chicago. I wish I could say the same." Volkov smiled, showing gold teeth. "You want to know why I'm here, why I'm working with the Rossi boy. That's the idea. Simple. This city is old, tired. The families who run it are weak, living on past glory. I see opportunity where others see tradition. And you think taking me out is the way to get it? I think you are in the way. You are the last of the old guard, Castellano. When you fall, the rest will follow." Victor leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Let me make something clear. You come at me, you better be ready to finish it. Because I don't lose. I've been doing this since before you set foot in this country, and I'll be doing it long after you're gone." Volkov's smile widened. "We will see. But I think you are already losing, my friend. You are distracted. Soft. I hear you have a woman now, a nurse, and a little girl." Victor's blood went cold. His expression didn't change, but inside, every alarm was screaming. "You stay away from them. Or what? You will kill me?" Volkov laughed. "Many have tried. I am still here." The meeting ended there. Victor stood and walked out, his men following, every muscle in his body coiled tight with rage. Outside, the December wind cut through his coat. and the city felt colder than it ever had. Marco lit a cigarette, his hands shaking slightly. "Boss, this is bad. Volkov's not going to back down. And he knows about Emma." "I know. So what do we do?" Victor looked out at the street, at the people walking by, oblivious to the war brewing in the shadows. He thought of Emma, of Lily, of the life he wanted but couldn't have. "We fight," he said, "and we win. But first we make sure Emma and Lily are safe. You want me to put protection on them?" "No, I don't want Volkov to know we're worried. But I want eyes on them, 24/7. If anyone gets close, I want to know." Marco nodded. "I'll handle it." That night, Victor went to Emma's apartment. She opened the door in sweatpants and an old Northwestern t-shirt, her hair tied back in a messy bun, and she smiled when she saw him. "Hey, I wasn't expecting you. I needed to see you." She stepped aside, and he walked in. Lily was asleep in her room, and the apartment was quiet, warm, safe. Emma made tea and they sat on the couch, the city lights glowing through the window. "You've been distant," Emma said softly, setting her mug down. "Is everything okay?" Victor looked at her, and for a moment, he considered telling her everything, about Volkov, about Tony, about the war that was coming. But he couldn't, because the truth would put her in danger, and he couldn't live with that. "I'm fine," he lied. "Just work." Emma studied him, and he could see that she didn't believe him, but she didn't push. She just reached over and took his hand, her touch grounding him, pulling him back from the edge. "I'm here," she said. "Whatever it is, I'm here." Victor squeezed her hand, and the rain outside picked up, drumming against the window. He didn't know how much longer he could keep these two worlds apart, but for now, in this moment, he let himself believe that maybe, somehow, he could have both. He was wrong. 3 days after the meeting with Volkov, one of Victor's clubs on the north side was firebombed. No one was killed. The club was closed for renovations. But the message was clear. This wasn't just about territory anymore. It was about breaking him, about showing the city that Victor Castellano was vulnerable. Victor stood outside the charred remains of the club, the smell of smoke and gasoline thick in the air. Firefighters were still hosing down the wreckage, and police cars lined the street, their lights flashing red and blue against the gray morning sky. A detective approached him. Sullivan, a guy Victor had known for years, a guy who took his money and looked the other way. "Victor," Sullivan said, his voice low, "you know anything about this?" "No. Come on. This has gang war written all over it." "I said no." Sullivan sighed. "Look, I can't protect you if this escalates. Keep it quiet, or I'll have to bring you in." Victor met his eyes. "I'll handle it." Sullivan nodded and walked away. Marco appeared beside Victor, his face grim. "Volkov's people," Marco said. "They hit us at 3 a.m., when the place was empty. Professional job. They wanted to send a message without killing anyone. Yet." Victor didn't respond. He stared at the blackened shell of the building, his mind cold and focused. This was escalation. Volkov was testing him, seeing how far he could push before Victor pushed back. "What do you want to do?" Marco asked. "Hit them back. Hard. Tonight." "Where?" "Volkov's got a warehouse on the west side near Pulaski. He's using it to store product and weapons. I want it gone by morning." Marco nodded. "I'll get the crew together." Victor turned and walked back to his car, the smoke clinging to his coat. His phone buzzed. Emma, asking if he wanted to have dinner that night, saying that Lily had been asking about him. He stared at the message, his chest tightening. He couldn't see her. Not now. Not when the city was about to explode. He typed back, "Can't tonight. I'll call you soon. Give Lily a hug for me." He hit send and tossed the phone onto the seat. Then he drove toward his office, the weight of the decision settling over him like a shroud. That night, Victor's crew hit Volkov's warehouse. It was a surgical strike. Marco and 6 men, armed with gasoline, C4, and automatic weapons. They moved in at midnight, cut the locks, planted the explosives, and torched the place. The fire spread fast, consuming crates of product and equipment, and the explosion shook the neighborhood, shattering windows 3 blocks away. By the time the fire department arrived, the warehouse was nothing but ash and twisted metal. No one was killed, but the message was sent. Victor Castellano wasn't backing down. The next morning, Volkov retaliated. Victor was in his office when Marco burst through the door, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Boss, we've got a problem." "What now?" "They hit one of our trucks on the Eisenhower. Killed the driver. It was Sal's nephew, the kid from the restaurant." And they took the shipment. But that's not the worst part. Victor's jaw tightened. What's the worst part? They left a message. Said if you don't back off, they're going after your family. Victor's blood went cold. My family? Your sister, Angela. They know where she lives, boss. They know about her kids. Victor stood, his hands clenched into fists, rage coursing through him like fire. Angela lived in Evanston with her husband and 2 kids. She had nothing to do with his world, and she never had. But Volkov didn't care. He was playing dirty, and he was willing to hurt anyone to win. Get Angela and her family out of the city, Victor said, his voice low and deadly. Now, put them somewhere safe, a hotel out of state, use cash, no credit cards, and don't tell me where. I don't want to know. Marco nodded and pulled out his phone, already making calls. Victor walked to the window and stared out at the city, his mind racing. This was spiraling out of control. Volkov wasn't just a rival. He was a predator, and he was circling, looking for weakness. And then Victor thought of Emma, of Lily. If Volkov was willing to go after Angela, he'd go after anyone Victor cared about. And Emma and Lily were more vulnerable than anyone. Victor grabbed his coat and headed for the door. I'll be back in an hour. Where are you going? Marco asked, to make sure someone's safe. Victor drove to Logan Square, his mind a storm of fear and fury. He parked outside Emma's building and called her. She answered on the second ring. Hey, he said, her voice warm and unsuspecting. I was just thinking about you. Emma, I need to see you. Now. What's wrong? You sound... I'll explain when I get there. Are you home? Yeah. Lily's at school, but I'm here. I have the day off. I'm outside. Buzz me in. A minute later, he was at her door. Emma opened it, her expression shifting from confusion to concern when she saw his face, the tension in his jaw, the darkness in his eyes. Victor, what's going on? He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, locking it. I need you to listen to me. Something's happening, and I need you and Lily to be safe. Safe from what? Victor hesitated. He'd spent weeks keeping her away from the truth, building a wall between his 2 worlds. But there was no hiding it now. The wall was crumbling, and she deserved to know. I'm not just an import-export, Emma. I run things, illegal things. I control territory. I move product. I make deals that keep this city running in ways most people never see. And right now, I'm in the middle of a war with someone who doesn't care who gets hurt. Emma stared at him, her face going pale. A war. Yes. And you think we're in danger? Me and Lily? I think anyone close to me is in danger. This man. His name is Volkov. He's already threatened my sister. He knows about you. Emma took a step back, her arms crossing over her chest, a defensive posture. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I didn't want to scare you, and because I thought I could keep you separate from it. I thought I could protect you without you ever knowing. But you can't. No, Victor said quietly. I can't. Emma was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, looking for something. Truth, maybe, or reassurance. Then she said, What do you want me to do? I want you to take Lily and leave the city for a few days. Go stay with your mom or go somewhere else, anywhere. Just get out of Chicago until this is over. And then what? You come back, and we pretend this never happened? I don't know. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She was stronger than that. I care about you, Victor. I really do. But I have a daughter, and I can't put her in danger. I won't. I know. That's why I'm asking you to leave. So what are we doing here? What is this between us? Victor looked at her, and for the first time in his life, he didn't have an answer. Because he wanted her. He wanted this life, this warmth, this peace. But he couldn't have it. Not while his world was burning. I don't know, he said again, his voice breaking. Emma wiped her eyes and nodded, her jaw set with determination. Okay, I'll take Lily and go. But Victor, she looked at him, her expression fierce. You need to end this, whatever it takes. Because if you don't, you're going to lose everything, including us. I know. She walked him to the door, and he kissed her forehead, a brief, desperate touch that felt like goodbye. Then he left, and the rain started up again, harder than before, as if the sky itself was mourning. That night, Victor made a decision. He called Marco and told him to gather everyone. Every soldier, every associate, everyone who owed him loyalty. They met in the back room of Rossi's, the same place where this had all started, where he'd sat across from Emma and felt something shift inside him. Victor stood at the head of the table, his men around him, Marco, Luca, Tommy, Danny, and a dozen others, and he laid out the plan. "We're ending this," he said, his voice cold and final. "Tomorrow night we hit Volkov and Tony Rossi at the same time. We take them out and we take back what's ours." "Boss," Marco said carefully, "that's a big risk. If it goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, then it does." Victor's voice was steel. "I'm done playing defense. I'm done letting them dictate the terms. We end this now, or we lose everything." The room was silent. Then, one by one, his men nodded, their loyalty absolute. Victor looked around the table, at the faces of the people who'd followed him for years, who'd bled for him, who'd kill for him, and he felt the weight of what he was about to do, not just for himself, but for them, for Emma, for Lily, for the life he wanted to build. Outside, the rain fell harder, and the city waited, holding its breath. The plan was simple: hit them both at once, fast and brutal, before they could regroup or call for reinforcements. Victor's crew split into two teams. Marco would lead the strike on Tony Rossi's compound in Bridgeport, a fortified house where Tony had been hiding since the war started, surrounded by his crew and enough firepower to hold off a small army. Victor would take the second team to Volkov's headquarters, a repurposed meatpacking plant on the west side that the Russian had turned into his base of operations, complete with guards, surveillance, and reinforced doors. They moved at 2 a.m., when the city was at its quietest, when even the criminals were asleep. Victor rode in the lead car with Luca, Tommy, and Danny, all of them armed with automatic weapons and enough firepower to level a building. The streets were empty, slick with rain, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and the steady drumming of water against the windshield. Victor's phone buzzed. A text from Marco. "In position. Waiting on your signal." Victor typed back, "Go in 5. He pocketed the phone and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Emma and Lily were safe, far from this nightmare. He'd made sure of it. Marco had arranged for them to stay with Emma's mother in Milwaukee, and Victor had sent 2 of his most trusted men to watch over them, just in case. But even knowing they were protected didn't ease the weight in his chest, because after tonight, everything would change. Either he'd win, and the city would be his again, or he'd lose, and everything he'd built would crumble. The car pulled up a block from the meatpacking plant. Victor and his men got out, moving through the shadows like ghosts, their footsteps silent on the wet pavement. The building loomed ahead, a hulking structure of brick and steel, its windows dark except for a few lights on the second floor where Volkov's men kept watch. Victor checked his watch. 2 minutes. He signaled to his men, and they fanned out, surrounding the building, cutting off escape routes. Danny, the youngest, barely 25 but sharp as a knife, cut the lock on the side door with bolt cutters. They slipped inside, the air thick with the smell of old blood and rust, the ghosts of 1,000 slaughtered animals still haunting the place. The interior was a maze of catwalks and machinery, the kind of place where sound echoed and shadows played tricks. Victor moved forward, his weapon raised, his senses sharp. He could hear voices above, Russian, low and casual. They didn't know he was here. Not yet. He reached the stairwell and started climbing, his men behind him, their movements synchronized from years of working together. The voices grew louder. He counted 3, maybe 4. When he reached the second floor, he saw them. Volkov's men, sitting around a table, playing cards and drinking vodka, their weapons leaning against the wall, within reach, but not in hand. Victor stepped into the light. "Evening, gentlemen." The Russians froze. One of them, a big guy with a shaved head and a neck like a tree trunk, reached for his gun, but Victor was faster. He fired once, twice, and the man dropped, blood spreading across the concrete floor. The others scrambled, but Victor's crew was already there, cutting them down with precision, each shot deliberate, efficient. The room went silent, except for the ringing in Victor's ears. He stepped over the bodies and moved toward the back office, where he knew Volkov would be, where the real target waited. The door was locked. Victor kicked it open, the wood splintering. Volkov was inside, standing by the window, a gun in his hand, his face calm, almost amused. He turned when Victor entered, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. 2 predators, 2 survivors, 2 men who'd built empires on blood and will. "Castellano," Volkov said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "I was wondering when you would come." "It's over," Victor said, his weapon trained on Volkov's chest. Volkov smiled, showing those gold teeth. Is it? You think killing me ends this? There are others. There are always others. Maybe, but you won't be around to see it. Volkov raised his gun, but Victor was faster. He fired 3 times, center mass, and Volkov staggered back, blood spreading across his shirt like a blooming flower. He fell to the floor, his eyes wide with shock, and then the light went out of them, and he was still. Victor stood there, breathing hard, the gun still in his hand. It was done. Volkov was dead. His phone buzzed. Marco. Boss, we got him. Tony's dead. It's over. Victor closed his eyes, relief and exhaustion washing over him in equal measure. Good. Get everyone out. Clean up and disappear. No traces. What about you? I'll meet you later. He hung up and looked down at Volkov's body, at the man who'd threatened everything he cared about. This was what his life had been for 20 years. Violence, blood, survival. And for the first time he felt the weight of it, the cost of every decision he'd made, every life he'd taken. He turned and walked out, leaving the bodies behind, leaving the past behind. By the time Victor got back to his apartment, the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The city was waking up, oblivious to the war that had ended in the night, oblivious to the blood that had been spilled in the shadows. He stood by the window, staring out at the skyline, and he felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, just emptiness, a hollow space where something used to be. His phone buzzed. Emma, are you okay? He stared at the message for a long time, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then he called her. She answered immediately. Victor, it's over, he said, his voice hoarse. You're safe, you and Lily. What happened? I ended it. Emma was quiet for a moment, and he could hear the relief in her breathing. Are you okay? Victor looked at his reflection in the window, his face drawn, his eyes hollow, his hands still shaking slightly from adrenaline. I don't know. Where are you? Home. I'm coming over. Emma! I'm coming over. Don't argue. She hung up before he could protest. An hour later there was a knock on his door. Victor opened it, and Emma was there, still in her coat, her hair damp from the rain that had started up again. She looked at him, and without a word, she stepped inside and wrapped her arms around him. Victor stood there, frozen, and then he held her back, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried since he was a kid, but he felt something break inside him, something he'd been holding on to for too long. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know. They stood there for a long time, the city humming outside, the rain tapping against the window. Then Emma pulled back and looked at him, her eyes fierce and determined. You need to decide, Victor. Right now. Are you going to keep living like this? Or are you going to choose something different? It's not that simple. Yes, it is. You have power. You have money. You have people who are loyal to you. Use it to build something better. Or walk away. But you can't keep doing this. You can't keep living in 2 worlds. And if I can't walk away, if the life won't let me, then you lose me. And you lose Lily. Because I can't do this. I can't watch you destroy yourself. And I won't let Lily get attached to someone who might not be there tomorrow. Victor looked at her, and he saw the truth in her eyes. The ultimatum that wasn't cruel, but necessary. She meant it, and he realized in that moment that she was the only thing that mattered. Not the city, not the power, not the empire he'd built. Just her, just them. I'll walk away, he said. Emma blinked, surprise flickering across her face. What? I'll walk away. From all of it. I'll find someone to take over and I'll get out. You mean that? I do. Emma searched his face, looking for the lie, the hesitation, but there was none. Okay, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Okay. Victor pulled her close, and for the first time in years, he felt hope. Real hope. Not the kind built on control or fear, but the kind that came from choosing something better, something worth fighting for. The transition took 3 months. Victor handed his empire over to Marco, who ran it with the same cold efficiency Victor once had. Victor kept a small stake, enough to live comfortably, enough to ensure his safety, but he was out. Done. He moved to a quieter neighborhood in Lincoln Park, closer to Emma and Lily. He started a legitimate business, a security consulting firm, that used his skills in ways that didn't require bloodshed. Former cops, former military, people who understood the world he'd come from, and wanted something different too. And every night, he came home to Emma, to dinners at her apartment, to Lily's laughter, and her endless questions about the world. to the 3 cats who'd finally accepted him as part of the family. It wasn't the life he'd imagined. It was better. One evening in early spring, as they sat on Emma's couch, Lily asleep in her room, Emma turned to him and said, "Do you miss it?" Victor thought about it. He thought about the power, the control, the weight of the city on his shoulders. He thought about the fear, the violence, the constant looking over his shoulder. And then he thought about this, the warmth of Emma's hand in his, the sound of rain against the window, the peace that came from knowing he'd chosen right. "No," he said, "I don't." Emma smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. Outside, the rain fell softly, a gentle rhythm that felt like a promise, like the city itself was blessing this new beginning. Victor closed his eyes and listened, and for the first time in his life, he felt free. The world he'd built was gone, but the world he'd found, the one with Emma and Lily, the one where he could be just Victor, not the boss, not the fixer, just a man, was everything he'd never known he needed, and it was enough. 6 months after walking away, Victor Castellano was a different man. He woke up every morning not to the sound of his phone ringing with emergencies, but to the smell of coffee brewing in Emma's kitchen. He spent his days building his security firm, hiring good people, doing honest work, and he spent his evenings with Emma and Lily, helping with homework, playing board games, watching movies on the couch with a bowl of popcorn between them. It was ordinary. It was beautiful. It was everything. But the past, Victor learned, doesn't let go easily. It was a Tuesday in late June when Marco called. Victor was at his office, reviewing contracts when his phone buzzed. He almost didn't answer. He'd made it clear to Marco that he was out, that he didn't want to know about the business unless it was absolutely necessary, but something made him pick up. "Marco, boss." Marco's voice was tight, strained. "We need to talk. I'm not the boss anymore. You are." "I know, but this involves you. Can you meet me? Rossi's tonight at 8. Victor hesitated. He'd stayed away from that world, from those places for 6 months. Going back felt like tempting fate, but Marco wouldn't call unless it was important. "All right, 8. He hung up and sat there, staring at his phone, a knot forming in his stomach. That night, Victor drove to Rossi's for the first time in half a year. The restaurant looked the same neon signs, the same worn leather booths, the same smell of garlic and meat. But Victor felt different walking through that door, like he was visiting a museum of his former life. Marco was waiting in the back booth, and he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him was a woman Victor didn't recognize. Mid-40s, sharp suit, calculating eyes. She had the look of someone who'd seen everything and been impressed by nothing. "Victor," Marco said, standing. "Thanks for coming. This is Agent Sarah Chen, FBI." Victor's blood went cold. He didn't sit. "What's this about?" Chen gestured to the empty seat. "Please, Mr. Castellano, sit. This won't take long." Victor sat slowly, his mind racing through possibilities, through exits, through contingencies he thought he'd left behind. "I'll get straight to it," Chen said, folding her hands on the table. "We've been building a case against Dmitry Volkov's organization for 2 years. When he was killed 6 months ago, we thought the case was dead too, but we were wrong. Volkov had a partner, someone higher up the chain, someone in Russia who's been using Chicago as a testing ground for expansion into the U.S. "What does this have to do with me?" Victor asked. "We need your help. You knew Volkov's operation. You knew his contacts, his methods. We want you to testify." Victor almost laughed. "You want me to testify? Against the Russian mob? In exchange for full immunity. For you, and for Marco here. Clean slate. I already have a clean slate. I'm out. Are you?" Chen leaned forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're still connected. You still own pieces of the business through shell companies. You're still collecting money from illegal operations. You're not as out as you think." Victor looked at Marco, who wouldn't meet his eyes. "You brought her here?" "Boss, she came to me. She said if we don't cooperate, she'll bring charges. Against both of us. Against everyone." Chen pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "These are the charges we're prepared to file. Racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder. We have evidence, Mr. Castellano. We have wiretaps, financial records, testimony from people you thought were loyal." Victor opened the folder and scanned the documents. His chest tightened. They had enough. Not enough to guarantee a conviction, maybe, but enough to make his life hell. Enough to drag Emma and Lily into it. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "Testify." Tell us everything you know about Volkov's operation, his contacts in Russia, his methods. Help us take down the people at the top. Do that, and you walk away. For real this time." Victor closed the folder and pushed it back. "And if I don't? Then we file charges. You go to trial. Maybe you win, maybe you don't. But either way, your new life is over. The woman you're with, the little girl, they'll know everything. And they'll be in danger. Because the people we're going after don't forgive cooperation. And they don't forgive witnesses." Victor's jaw clenched. "You're threatening them. I'm stating facts. You help us. Everyone's safe. You don't. And you're putting them at risk." Victor stood. "I need to think about it." "You have 48 hours, Chen said. "After that, we move forward with or without you." Victor walked out, Marco following. Outside, the June air was warm and humid, the city alive with summer energy. Victor leaned against his car, his hands shaking. "I'm sorry, boss," Marco said. "I didn't know what else to do." "It's fine. You did the right thing. What are you going to do?" Victor looked up at the sky, at the city lights drowning out the stars. "I don't know." He drove to Emma's apartment, his mind a storm. When he arrived, she was on the couch, reading a book, Lily asleep in her room. She looked up when he walked in, and her smile faded when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" Victor sat down beside her and told her everything. About the FBI, about the testimony, about the choice he had to make. Emma listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she set her book down and took his hand. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I don't know. If I testify, I'm putting a target on my back. On yours. On Lily's. But if I don't, they'll charge me, and I'll go to prison, and you'll be alone. So you're asking me to choose?" "No. I'm asking you what you think." Emma was quiet for a long time, staring at their joined hands. Then she said, "I think you've spent your whole life running from the past, Victor, and I think it's time to face it. Not for me, not for Lily, but for you, because you'll never really be free until you do. And if something happens, if they come after us, then we deal with it, together." Victor looked at her, and he saw the strength in her eyes, the courage that had drawn him to her in the first place. She wasn't afraid, and if she wasn't afraid, then maybe he didn't have to be either. "Okay," he said. "I'll do it." Emma kissed him, soft and fierce. "I'm proud of you." 2 days later, Victor met with Agent Chen and agreed to testify. The process took months. Depositions, meetings, preparation. The trial was set for the following spring, and in the meantime, Victor and Emma and Lily were placed under federal protection. It was strange, living with U.S. Marshals watching the apartment, knowing that every move was monitored. But it was also freeing in a way, because for the first time, Victor wasn't hiding. He was facing the truth, and he was doing it with Emma by his side. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Victor testified for 2 days, laying out everything he knew about Volkov's operation, about the Russian contacts, about the money and the violence and the machinery of the underworld. It was brutal. The defense attorneys tried to tear him apart, to paint him as a criminal, a liar, a man who couldn't be trusted. But Victor held firm, and when it was over, the jury convicted 5 members of the Russian organization, including Volkov's partner in Moscow. When the verdict was read, Victor felt a weight lift from his shoulders. A burden he'd been carrying for 20 years finally set down. A year after the trial, Victor and Emma got married. It was a small ceremony in a park near the lake, just family and a few close friends. Lily was the flower girl, and she took her job very seriously, scattering petals with fierce concentration. Marco was there, standing beside Victor as his best man, and Angela cried through the entire ceremony. When Victor and Emma exchanged vows, he looked into her eyes and said, "You saved me. I didn't know I needed saving, but you did, and I promise to spend the rest of my life being the man you see in me." Emma smiled, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, Victor Castellano, not for who you were, but for who you are." They kissed, and the small crowd cheered, and Victor felt something he'd never felt before. Complete, utter peace. 5 years later, Victor stood in the backyard of their house in Evanston, watching Lily play soccer with her friends. She was 12 now, tall and confident, and she still wanted to be a veterinarian, or maybe an astronaut. She hadn't decided yet. Emma came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" "How lucky I am." "Sappy." "True." She laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder. Inside, their son, 2-year-old Michael, named after Victor's father, was napping, and the house smelled like the lasagna Emma had made for dinner. "Do you ever think about it?" Emma asked. "The old life?" Victor thought about it. He thought about the power, the control, the fear. He thought about Volkov, about Tony Rossi, about all the men he'd known who'd died chasing something that didn't matter. "Sometimes," he said, "but not the way you think. I don't miss it. I'm grateful it led me here." Emma smiled. "Me too." They stood there, watching Lily play, watching the sun set over the city, and Victor felt the rain start up again. Light, gentle, a summer shower that smelled like new beginnings. The world he'd built was gone, but the world he'd found, the one with Emma and Lily and Michael, the one where he could be just Victor, just a man, just a father and a husband, was everything he'd never known he needed. And it was more than enough. It was everything. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts. What moment resonated with you the most? Let us know where you're listening from. We love hearing from our audience around the world.